I woke up on my 30th birthday to the sound of my husband laughing in our kitchen. Not with me, at me. She actually believed I'd give her anything, Marcus said, his voice carrying down the hallway with that particular brand of cruelty I'd somehow learned to ignore over the years. The postnup makes sure of that. She signed away everything, the house, the business assets, even her claim to my inheritance. My mother made sure it was airtight. A woman's voice responded, breathy, familiar, with that little giggle she always did when she thought she was being clever. You're so smart, baby. God, she's so pathetic she doesn't even know what she signed. Did she really not read it? Rachel? Marcus laughed harder. She was so drugged up and scared after the birth, she would have signed anything. Mom knew exactly what she was doing, bringing it to the hospital like that. That's kind of genius, actually. Brutal, but genius. That's my mother. She knew Rachel was a gold digger from day one. This was just insurance. I should have been shocked. I should have been devastated. I should have cried, screamed, thrown something, but I'd heard these exact words before. Because I died 3 months from now, and somehow, impossibly, I was back. I lay in our king-sized bed, the one I'd picked out but Marcus had paid for, which meant it was his, according to the logic of our marriage, and stared at the ceiling I'd painted a soft cream color 5 years ago. The paint was starting to crack in the corners. I'd mentioned it to Marcus twice. He'd said we couldn't afford to repaint when we had more important expenses, though he'd somehow found $15,000 for a golf trip to Scotland last month. The first time I lived this day, I'd walked into that kitchen with a smile on my face and a birthday cake in my hands. I'd baked it myself at 5 in the morning because Marcus said he loved my baking, said it reminded him of his grandmother, said it made him feel taken care of. The cake had been chocolate with raspberry filling, his favorite, and I'd spent 3 hours on the decorations because I wanted everything to be perfect. I'd wanted him to love me the way I loved him. I'd walked in holding that cake, singing happy birthday to myself because no one else was going to do it. And I'd found him with Sheila, my best friend since college, my maid of honor, the woman who'd held my hand through my miscarriage 2 years ago and told me everything would be okay. They'd been kissing against our kitchen counter, his hand up her skirt, her legs wrapped around his waist. And when I dropped the cake, 3 hours of work splattering across the floor, they'd barely even separated. Marcus had laughed, actually laughed. "Babe, don't be dramatic," he'd said, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Sheila and I were just talking." "With your tongue down her throat?" I'd whispered, my voice breaking. "See, this is why we can't work. You're always so suspicious, so accusatory. Sheila actually trusts me." That had been the beginning of my end, the start of a 3-month spiral into absolute hell. Marcus had filed for divorce the next day. The postnup I'd signed 5 years ago, the one his mother Helen had brought to my hospital bed while I was bleeding out after giving birth to Emma 6 weeks early, the one I'd signed with shaking hands while drugged on pain medication because Helen told me if I didn't sign immediately, Marcus would leave me and take my baby. That postnup had been exactly what Marcus claimed. Airtight. Comprehensive. Devastating. I'd left the marriage with nothing. Not the house, not the cars, not a single cent from his business or his trust fund. The lawyer I'd managed to scrape together money to hire, some overworked public defender who squeezed me in between criminal cases, had told me the postnup was unfortunately enforceable and I should just move on. I'd lived in my car for 6 weeks. I'd worked 3 jobs trying to save enough for an apartment deposit. I'd seen Emma on Marcus's terms, supervised visits at his mother's house where Helen watched me like a criminal and made sure I knew I was there on sufferance. And Sheila? Sheila had moved into my house, slept in my bed, played mother to my daughter. Then came the accident. I'd been driving home from my overnight shift at the diner, so exhausted I could barely see straight. Sheila had been driving the opposite direction in Marcus's Mercedes, the one I'd helped him pick out, the one I'd never been allowed to drive because it was too expensive for me to risk. She'd swerved into my lane. Later, the police would say it was an accident, that she'd been distracted, that these things happened. But I'd seen her face in the split second before impact. I'd seen her smile. The last thing I remembered from my first life was lying on the asphalt, bleeding, watching Sheila check her phone while standing over me. She'd been texting someone. Marcus, probably. and she'd looked down at me with this expression of mild annoyance, like I was a problem she'd finally solved. Then nothing. Then I'd woken up here in this bed on this day with my husband laughing about how stupid I was in my own kitchen. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding. My hands were shaking, but not with fear, with rage, with opportunity, with the absolute certainty that this time things would be different. The bedroom door opened. Marcus walked in, phone in hand, wearing the suit I'd picked up from the dry cleaner yesterday. He looked good. He always looked good. At 38, he'd aged into his looks. The baby face he'd had when we met had sharpened into something more distinguished. His hair was perfect. His teeth were perfect. His body was perfect, thanks to the personal trainer he saw 4 times a week. He smiled at me, that same charming smile that had made me fall for him 10 years ago when I was a broke graduate student, and he was a young executive with a trust fund and big dreams. "Happy birthday, babe," he said, his voice warm and loving, like he hadn't just been in the kitchen plotting my destruction. "Sleep well?" I looked at him, really looked at him. Studied the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, the way he was already glancing at his phone, the way he stood in the doorway like he couldn't wait to leave. How had I not seen it before? How had I missed all the signs? "Great," I said, keeping my voice steady and normal. "Actually, I need to talk to you about something." His smile tightened just slightly, his tell. "Can it wait? I have a breakfast meeting." "With Sheila?" I asked pleasantly. I watched him calculate. We'd been so careful in the first timeline, keeping the affair secret for another 3 weeks until my birthday cake incident. He wasn't supposed to know that I knew, not yet. "Sheila from your book club?" He laughed, all ease and casual dismissal. "Babe, that's a client meeting. You know I can't discuss work with you." The condescension in that sentence. The implication that I was too stupid to understand his important business. I'd heard it 1,000 times in our marriage and somehow convinced myself it was normal, that he was just being protective of his work stress. Right, of course. I smiled back at him, matching his energy. "Then yes, we can talk later. Have a good meeting." He came over and kissed my forehead, a gesture that once made me feel loved and cherished, and now made my skin crawl. "That's my girl. I'll try to be home for dinner." He wouldn't be. He never was on Tuesdays. Tuesdays were when he spent the night at Sheila's apartment downtown, the one I didn't know about in my first life. The one I knew about now because I'd found the lease agreement after he'd died, and I'd been going through his papers for the estate, back when I'd thought there might be something left for Emma. There hadn't been. Marcus had spent everything. The house had been mortgaged 3 times over. The business was on the verge of bankruptcy. Even his trust fund was empty, drained by years of living beyond his means while telling me we had to be careful with money. I waited until I heard his car pull out of the driveway, the Mercedes he'd bought last year, the one that cost more than most people's houses. And then I grabbed my phone with shaking hands. I knew exactly what I needed to do. The first time around, I'd been helpless because I'd been ignorant. I hadn't known I could fight the Postnup. I hadn't known Marcus was lying about our finances. I hadn't known anything until it was too late. This time, I knew everything, and I was going to use it. I pulled up my contacts and scrolled to a name I'd found too late last time, Catherine Whitmore. The lawyer who'd made headlines 6 months ago for destroying a tech CEO in his divorce, getting her client $60 million and full custody of their 3 kids, the lawyer whose number I'd found in my research after everything had fallen apart when I'd been desperately Googling how to fight an unfair postnup from the library computer because I couldn't afford internet. My hands were shaking as I dialed. It was 7:30 in the morning. Would she even answer? "Whitmore and Associates, this is Jennifer. How may I direct your call?" "I need to speak with Catherine Whitmore," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Tell her it's regarding a fraudulent post-nuptial agreement that was signed under extreme duress. Tell her I'm willing to pay whatever it takes for the best representation available." There was a pause. "May I ask who's calling?" "Rachel Chen and Jennifer," I added. "Tell her it's urgent. Tell her I know my husband is planning to file for divorce within the next 2 weeks and I need to get ahead of it. Please hold." The hold music was classical, Vivaldi, I thought. I'd majored in music before dropping out to marry Marcus, before his mother had convinced me that being a wife and mother was more than enough for someone like me. Someone from my background. Someone who should be grateful a Chen had even looked at her twice. "Mrs. Chen?" A woman's voice, cool and professional. "This is Catherine Whitmore. Jennifer says you have a fraudulent postnup?" "Yes." I took a deep breath. My mother-in-law forced me to sign a postnuptial agreement 5 years ago while I was in the hospital after giving birth. I was hemorrhaging and about to go into emergency surgery. She told me if I didn't sign immediately, my husband would divorce me and take custody of my daughter. There was no lawyer present for me. She had a notary with her. I was on multiple pain medications. And I just found out my husband has been having an affair for years and is planning to use that postnup to leave me with nothing. Silence. Then, "Did you say you signed it while hemorrhaging? While medicated? Without independent counsel?" "Yes." "And your mother-in-law presented it, not your husband." "He was supposedly stuck in a meeting. I found out later he was with his mistress." More silence. Then Catherine laughed, short and sharp. "Mrs. Chen, when can you come to my office?" "Is this afternoon too soon?" "This afternoon is perfect. Bring the postnup if you have a copy. Bring any financial documents you can access." "And Mrs. Chen?" Her voice turned serious. "Don't tell your husband you're calling me. Don't tell anyone. Not friends, not family. No one." "I won't." "Good. See you at 2 o'clock. My assistant will send you the address." She hung up. I sat there on the bed, phone in my hand, and felt something I hadn't felt in my first life. Hope. Then I got to work. I knew where Marcus kept everything. In my first life, I'd respected his privacy, never snooped, trusted him completely. What a fucking joke that had been. His office was downstairs, a room he kept locked and told me was for work only. I'd believed him. I'd been so stupid. Went to his sock drawer, because men were predictable, and found the spare key exactly where I knew it would be. Then I went downstairs to his office and let myself in. The room was exactly as I remembered. Sleek desk, expensive computer setup, walls lined with books he'd never read but kept because they looked professional. The safe was behind a painting of his father, because Marcus had all the imagination of a B-movie villain. The combination was our anniversary. 08-15-2015. The day I'd promised to love him forever, and he'd promised to cherish me always. The safe clicked open. Inside was exactly what I needed. The original postnup, filed copies of our tax returns for the past 5 years, property deeds, car titles, and, jackpot, a folder labeled personal that I knew contained information about his hidden accounts. In my first life, I'd found these after he died, when I was executor of his estate by default since Sheila wasn't his legal wife. I'd discovered he had 3 bank accounts I'd never known about, 2 in the Cayman Islands and 1 in Switzerland. I discovered that while he'd been telling me we couldn't afford dance lessons for Emma or a new washing machine when ours broke, he'd been funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars into offshore accounts. But I'd been too late to do anything about it. The money was gone, spent, or hidden so well, even the estate lawyers couldn't find it. This time, I was ahead of the game. I pulled out my phone and started photographing everything. Every page, every document, every incriminating piece of paper. I worked methodically, making sure I got clear shots, making sure I had evidence of everything. Then I went to his computer. I knew his password, Emma 2019, the year our daughter was born, which would be sweet if he actually spent any time with her. I logged in and went straight to his email. There were hundreds of messages from Sheila. Thousands, actually, going back 7 years. Love letters, sex messages, plans for their future together. There were emails to divorce lawyers, 3 different ones he'd consulted, looking for the one who'd be most aggressive in protecting his assets from a gold-digging wife. There were emails to his mother, plotting how to get me to sign the postnup, laughing about how easy it had been to manipulate me while I was vulnerable. There were emails to his accountant about financial strategies for asset protection in anticipation of marital dissolution. I forwarded everything to a new email address I created on the spot, one Marcus would never find. Then I cleared the sent folder so he wouldn't know what I'd done. By the time I heard Emma's voice on the baby monitor, She was 5 years old now, still taking morning naps on weekends. I'd gathered enough evidence to bury Marcus 10 times over. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, locked the office, returned the key to his sock drawer, and went to get my daughter. Emma was rubbing. Her eyes, her dark hair a mess around her face. She looked like me, thank God for that. At least she'd have one parent who actually gave a damn about her. "Mama," she said, reaching for me. "Is it your birthday?" "It is, baby." "I made you something." She scrambled out of bed and ran to her art corner, returning with a drawing of the two of us holding hands under a rainbow. "It's you and me being happy." I hugged her tight, breathing in the smell of her shampoo, feeling her little heartbeat against my chest. In my first life, I'd lost her. Not permanently, I'd still had visitation rights, but I'd lost the everyday moments, the bedtime stories, the morning cuddles, the casual intimacy of being her mother. Sheila had taken my place. Marcus's mother had reinforced it, and Emma, only 5 years old, had slowly started calling Sheila Mommy, while I became Rachel, or sometimes biological mom. It had destroyed me, killed me in ways that had nothing to do with car accidents. "It's perfect," I told Emma. "It's the best birthday present ever." "Better than the cake Daddy got you?" I froze. "Daddy got me a cake?" "Uh-huh. He told Grandma he ordered your favorite from the bakery. He said it's a surprise." Of course he did. In this timeline, where I wasn't supposed to know about Sheila yet, Marcus was still playing the good husband. The surprise cake would be waiting for me tonight. Chocolate raspberry, the one I'd made myself in my first life. And he'd present it with a smile and a kiss and tell me how much he loved me. Then in 2 weeks, he'd file for divorce and act shocked when I was devastated. "That's so sweet of him," I said, matching Emma's enthusiasm. "Should we make him a special dinner to say thank you?" "Yeah, can we make his favorite?" "Absolutely." I spent the day being the perfect wife and mother. I took Emma to the park. I went grocery shopping and bought expensive steaks for Marcus's dinner. I cleaned the house. I even baked cookies because that's what the old Rachel would do. The new Rachel, the one who'd died and come back, was thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else. At 1:45, my mother called to say she could watch Emma for a few hours. I'd texted her earlier with some excuse about a doctor's appointment. Mom didn't ask questions. She never did. Too caught up in her own life to notice mine was falling apart. At 2 o'clock exactly, I walked into Catherine Whitmore's office building, a gleaming tower in the heart of downtown. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of place that screamed money and power. The reception area for Whitmore and Associates was on the 50th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I could see the park where I'd taken Emma this morning, the shopping district where I'd bought Marcus's steaks, the whole sprawling metropolis that my husband claimed he'd conquered. From up here, it all looked very small. Mrs. Chen, a young woman, approached professionally, dressed with a warm smile. "I'm Jennifer. Ms. Whitmore is ready for you." I followed her down a hallway lined with photographs. Catherine Whitmore with various celebrities and politicians, Catherine accepting awards, Catherine in courtrooms looking fierce and confident. The woman I was about to meet was a legend, and I was about to ask her to destroy my life so I could rebuild it. Catherine's office was corner-facing, with windows on 2 sides and a view that probably cost more in rent than my first apartment. The woman herself was standing behind a massive desk, talking on the phone. She gestured for me to sit, holding up one finger. "No, Richard, I don't care what the mediator suggested," she said into the phone, her voice pleasant but firm. "My client is not accepting 30% when she's entitled to 50. Your client cheated for 3 years and hid assets in his brother's name. We have proof, so you can either come back with a real offer or we'll see you in court and I'll make sure the judge knows about the Cayman Island accounts too." She hung up and turned to me with a smile. Catherine Whitmore was not what I expected. I'd seen her photos, of course, but in person, she was even more striking. She had to be in her mid-50s with silver hair cut in a sharp bob, ice blue eyes, and the kind of bone structure that belonged in a fashion magazine. She was wearing a black suit that probably cost more than my car, with a simple string of pearls and no other jewelry. She looked like the kind of woman who ate men like Marcus for breakfast and didn't even burp. Mrs. Chen, she said, extending her hand. Catherine Whitmore, please sit. I shook her hand. Her grip was firm and confident, and sat in one of the leather chairs across from her desk. Now, Catherine said, settling into her own chair. Tell me everything. So I did. I told her about meeting Marcus in college, about how charming he'd been, how he'd swept me off my feet with expensive dates and grand romantic gestures. I told her about his mother's disapproval from day one, about how Helen had made it clear I wasn't good enough for a Chen, about how she'd tried to convince Marcus to end it before we got serious. I told her about the whirlwind wedding, the perfect first year, the subtle ways Marcus had started controlling me, how he'd convinced me to quit my job because no wife of mine needs to work, how he'd put everything in his name for tax purposes, how he'd slowly isolated me from my friends, my interests, my identity, until I was just Marcus Chen's wife. I told her about Emma's birth, the complications, the emergency C-section, the terror of watching my premature baby hooked up to machines in the NICU while I bled out from a uterine tear. I was in surgery for 4 hours, I said, my voice flat. When I woke up, I was back in my room and Helen was there. Marcus wasn't. She said he was in an important meeting and couldn't get away. She had papers in her hand and a man she introduced as a notary. Catherine's expression was unreadable, but I saw her pen tighten in her hand. She told me that Marcus's company required all executives to have post-nuptial agreements with their spouses. She said it was standard practice, completely normal, nothing personal. Then she told me that if I didn't sign immediately, right then, while I was still recovering from surgery, Marcus would assume I was only with him for money. He'd divorce me and fight for full custody of Emma. She said I'd never see my baby again. What medications were you on? Everything. Morphine for the pain, antibiotics for infection risk, something for my blood pressure. I could barely stay awake. I kept drifting in and out of consciousness. And you signed? I signed. The shame of it still burned. I was terrified. I'd almost died. My baby was in the NICU and might not make it. My husband wasn't there, and his mother was standing over me telling me I was about to lose everything if I didn't do what she said. Did you read the agreement? I tried, but the words kept swimming. I couldn't focus. Helen kept saying there wasn't time, that the notary had another appointment, that I needed to decide right now. How long were you given to review it? Maybe 10 minutes, and I was fading in and out the whole time. Catherine's jaw tightened. Did anyone explain the terms to you? Helen gave me a summary. She said it was just confirming that Marcus's business assets and family money would stay separate from marital assets. She made it sound reasonable, like I'd still have a claim to our house and savings and everything we built together. And the reality? I pulled out the copy I'd photographed this morning and handed it to her. The reality is that I signed away everything. The house, even though I put money into it from my inheritance when my grandmother died. The cars. Any claim to his business or income or trust fund. If we divorce for any reason, including his infidelity, I leave with nothing except whatever personal belongings I can prove I brought into the marriage. Catherine opened the folder and started reading. I watched her face, saw the moment she found the first problem, then the second, then the third. Mrs. Chen, she said slowly, did you know this agreement has no severability clause? What does that mean? It means if any part of the agreement is found to be unenforceable, the entire agreement is void. It's a basic provision that any competent lawyer would include. She kept reading. There's also no independent consideration. You got nothing in exchange for signing away your rights. No payment, no concessions, nothing. And look at this, the notary signature. She pulled out her phone and tapped something, then showed me the screen. It was a search result for notary licensing in our state. The name on this notarization? Janet Holloway? She wasn't licensed as a notary in this state at the time. You signed. She didn't become licensed until 6 months later. My heart skipped. So it's fake? It's worse than fake. It's fraudulent, which means your mother-in-law knowingly brought a fake notary to your hospital bed to witness your signature on a coerced agreement. Catherine's smile was sharp. Mrs. Chen, this isn't just unenforceable. This is potentially criminal. What? Notary fraud is a crime. Forging legal documents is a crime. Coercing someone to sign a legal agreement while they're medically incapacitated, that's a whole other level of illegal. She set the Postnup down and looked at me directly. This agreement is worthless. Any judge would throw it out in about 5 minutes. But more than that, you have grounds to file charges against your mother-in-law for fraud, forgery, and coercion. I sat back, stunned. In my first life, the public defender had barely glanced at the Postnup before telling me it was enforceable. He'd been overworked, underpaid, and completely uninterested in actually helping me. But my last lawyer said, "Your last lawyer was wrong, or lazy, or both." Catherine's voice was kind but firm. "Mrs. Chen, may I call you Rachel?" "Yes." "Rachel, I need you to understand something. This agreement is garbage. It wouldn't hold up in any court in America. The circumstances under which you signed it, medicated, post-surgery, under threat of losing your child with no legal counsel and a fake notary, that's textbook duress. Add in the lack of consideration, the missing clauses, the fraudulent notarization. This is one of the worst postnups I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot. Then why did my other lawyer? Because he didn't care. Or he didn't know. Or your husband's lawyer intimidated him into not fighting. But I'm not intimidated. And I care very much about women being screwed over by rich men and their manipulative mothers." I felt tears starting and blinked them back. "So what do we do?" "First, I need to know, why now? You said your husband is planning to file for divorce in 2 weeks. How do you know that?" This was the tricky part. I couldn't tell her I'd lived this before. She'd think I was insane. "I hired a private investigator last month," I lied. "I suspected he was cheating. The investigator found evidence of the affair and also found emails between Marcus and divorce lawyers. He's been planning this for months." "And the mistress?" "My best friend, or former best friend, Sheila Barnett." Catherine's eyebrow rose. "How very cliché. Do you have the investigator's report?" "Yes." I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos I'd taken this morning. Emails between Marcus and Sheila, between Marcus and his lawyers, between Marcus and his mother discussing their plans. Catherine looked through them, her expression growing more disgusted with each swipe. "The hemorrhaging was perfect timing," she read aloud from one of Helen's emails to Marcus. "She was so scared and confused. She signed everything without question. I told you it would work." She looked up at me. "They planned this. They deliberately waited until you were at your most vulnerable to force you to sign." "Yes." "And your husband was with his mistress during your surgery?" "Yes, I found hotel receipts. He checked in that morning and didn't leave until the next afternoon." "So while you were almost dying and your daughter was fighting for her life, he was fucking his mistress and plotting with his mother to steal your rights?" "Yes." Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen. "Rachel," she said, "I'm going to enjoy this case very much. Because I'm not just going to win. I'm going to destroy them." Over the next week, Catherine and her team built a case that was absolutely devastating. They hired a forensic accountant named David Wu, who started digging into Marcus's finances. Within 3 days, he'd found the hidden offshore accounts, the shell corporations, the creative accounting that made Marcus's legitimate business look barely profitable while millions of dollars flowed through entities with names like Chen Holdings LLC and Pacific Investment Trust. "He's been committing fraud," David told me in a meeting at Catherine's office. "Not just against you, against his own company, against his shareholders, against the IRS. He's been shifting money around to avoid taxes and hide assets, and he's been doing it for years." "How much money are we talking about?" conservatively, about $8 million that should be marital assets, but he's hidden. Probably more that I haven't found yet. $8 million. While he'd told me we couldn't afford Emma's ballet lessons. Catherine also hired a private investigator named Maria Gonzalez, who was significantly more competent than the fictional one I'd claimed to hire. Maria followed Marcus for 3 days and came back with photographic evidence of his affair with Sheila, dates at expensive restaurants, overnight stays at her apartment, shopping trips where he bought her jewelry and clothes. He's not even trying to hide it, Maria reported. He parks his car right in front of her building. He kisses her goodbye on the street. He's either incredibly arrogant or incredibly stupid. Both, I said, and works for me. Arrogant and stupid is easy to prosecute. Then Catherine brought in her secret weapon, a specialist in medical malpractice and patient rights named Dr. Eleanor Reeves. I need you to examine the circumstances under which Ms. Chen signed this postnup, Catherine told her, handing over my medical records, which I'd requested and received, another thing I'd learned to do in my first life. Tell me if there's any way she could have had the capacity to understand what she was signing. Dr. Reeves read through the records, her expression growing more severe. No, she said finally. Absolutely not. She was on a morphine drip for pain management post-surgery. She'd lost significant blood and had just received a transfusion. Her blood pressure was unstable, and she was less than 8 hours post-op from a major abdominal surgery with complications. She looked at Catherine. A patient in this condition cannot legally consent to medical procedures, much less sign binding legal documents. Any lawyer who thinks this is enforceable is either incompetent or malicious. Both, Catherine said. Can you testify to that in court? Absolutely. I'll also note that presenting legal documents to a patient in this condition, especially with the implied threat of losing custody of her child, constitutes medical abuse. That patient was vulnerable, afraid, and in no condition to make rational decisions. I listened to them discuss my trauma like it was a case study, and I felt something shift inside me. In my first life, I'd been so ashamed. I'd felt stupid for signing, weak for not fighting back, pathetic for letting it happen. But it hadn't been my fault. It had never been my fault. They'd targeted me when I was at my weakest. They'd manipulated me, threatened me, coerced me. And they'd thought they'd get away with it because I was too scared and powerless to fight back. They were wrong. So, I said when Dr. Reeves had finished, what's our strategy? Catherine pulled out a legal pad covered in notes. We have multiple options. Option 1, we file for divorce first before Marcus can. We challenge the postnup immediately, claim all marital assets, and demand full custody with supervised visitation only for Marcus due to his neglect of Emma and his ongoing affair. What's option 2? Option 2 is more aggressive. We threaten Marcus with criminal charges for fraud, both the financial fraud against his company and shareholders, and the conspiracy with his mother to defraud you via the fake notarization. We use that as leverage to force him into the most unfavorable settlement possible. What about Sheila? Catherine's smile turned predatory. I've had Maria looking into her as well. It turns out your former best friend has some interesting financial irregularities of her own. She pulled out a folder and handed it to me. Inside were bank statements, credit card records, and a paper trail that showed Sheila had been embezzling from her employer, a nonprofit called Community Care Alliance. She's been skimming donations, Catherine explained. Small amounts over several years, totaling about $200,000. She's been using it to fund her lifestyle, the expensive apartment, the designer clothes, the trips. She's been trying to look like she's in Marcus's league financially. Can we use this? Oh, yes, I have a friend at the DA's office who would be very interested in this information. White-collar crime against a charity? That's exactly the kind of case that makes prosecutors look good. So we could have her arrested? We could, or we could use it as leverage to make her go away quietly. Your choice. I thought about it. In my first life, Sheila had destroyed me without a second thought. She'd taken my husband, my home, my daughter, and then she'd killed me. Whether the accident was deliberate or not, she'd left me to die on that road. I want her prosecuted, I said. I want her to face consequences. Done. I'll make the call tomorrow. Catherine made a note. Now, back to your husband. Which option do you prefer? Can we do both? File for divorce and threaten him with criminal charges? We can. It's risky. He might call our bluff and force us to follow through, which would make the divorce messier. But if he backs down, we can get a very favorable settlement very quickly. Let's do it. Catherine studied me for a moment. You're sure? Once we start this, there's no going back. Your marriage is over, your relationship with his family is over, and Marcus is going to hate you. Good, I said. He should have thought of that before he fucked my best friend while I was bleeding out after giving birth to his daughter. Catherine laughed, delighted. Rachel, I think we're going to be great friends. We filed for divorce on a Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks before Marcus had planned to file in the original timeline. Marcus was served at his office in front of his colleagues and his father by a process server Catherine had specifically chosen for his intimidating size and absolutely deadpan delivery. I was at Catherine's office when it happened, watching Emma play with the toys Catherine kept for clients' children, waiting for Marcus's response. It came at 3:47 p.m. in the form of 17 missed calls and a dozen increasingly unhinged text messages. What the fuck, Rachel? You filed for divorce? Are you insane? Call me right now. This is ridiculous. You're being emotional. Call me and we'll talk this through. The postnup means you get nothing. Do you understand that? Nothing. My lawyer says you're going to regret this. You're making a huge mistake. Think about Emma. Don't do this to our family. Fine, have it your way. My lawyer says this will be over in a month and you'll be begging me to take you back. I showed them to Catherine, who read through them with an expression of professional disdain. He's panicking, she said. Good, let him panic. Should I respond? Absolutely not. Don't call, don't text, don't engage at all. All communication goes through me now. If he shows up at the house, don't answer the door. If he tries to talk to you in public, walk away. Give him nothing. What about Emma? The temporary custody order gives you primary physical custody pending the hearing. He gets supervised visitation on weekends, supervised by a professional third party, not his mother. If he tries to take her without authorization, that's kidnapping and we call the police. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Emma was safe. She was with me, and Marcus couldn't take her away. At 5:23 p.m., Marcus's lawyer called Catherine. I sat in her office and listened to her half of the conversation, watching her face give away nothing. Yes, Mr. Preston, I'm aware of the post-nuptial agreement. Yes, I've reviewed it thoroughly. Oh, I disagree very strongly with that assessment. Well, I suppose we'll let the judge decide, won't we? Mediation, perhaps. But first, I'd like to discuss some other matters with you. Yes, I'm referring to the offshore accounts, and the shell corporations, and the fraudulent notarization of the postnup itself. I see. Yes, I thought that might change your perspective. Tomorrow at 10, we'll be there. She hung up and smiled at me. He wants to mediate. That fast? His lawyer is smarter than Marcus. He took one look at our evidence and realized that if this goes to trial, Marcus doesn't just lose the divorce, he loses his freedom. Fraud, forgery, tax evasion? That's federal prison time. So what happens now? Now we negotiate. We go into mediation tomorrow with our demands, and we don't back down until we get everything we want. What if Marcus refuses? Then we hand our evidence over to the SEC, the IRS, and the district attorney, and we watch Marcus's entire life implode. But he won't refuse. Men like him always cave when they realize they're actually going to face consequences. She was right. The mediation was held in a conference room at a neutral attorney's office with a professional mediator named Richard Chen, no relation to Marcus, ironically, and enough tension to choke on. Marcus showed up looking haggard. He'd lost weight in the 2 weeks since I'd filed. His suit was rumpled, his hair needed cutting, and he had circles under his eyes that suggested he wasn't sleeping well. Good. His lawyer, Preston, was everything I expected. Middle-aged, expensive suit, perpetual frown that suggested he was deeply unhappy about how this case was going. Catherine came in like a force of nature, her team behind her carrying boxes of evidence. She smiled at Marcus like a shark smiles at prey. "Gentlemen," she said, "shall we begin?" The mediator opened with platitudes about finding common ground and working together for everyone's benefit. Catherine let him finish, then cut straight to business. "Here are my client's demands," she said, sliding a document across the table. "Full physical custody of the minor child, with Mr. Chen receiving supervised visitation every other weekend. Primary residence, the family home, to be deeded entirely to Mrs. Chen. 65% of all marital assets, including the offshore accounts, to be transferred to Mrs. Chen. Mr. Chen is to pay child support of $8,000 per month and alimony of $15,000 per month for 5 years. Mr. Chen is also to pay all of Mrs. Chen's legal fees and establish a college fund of $500,000 for the minor child." Preston's face went red. "This is outrageous. The postnup is fraudulent," Catherine interrupted smoothly. "It was signed under duress by a patient who was medically incapacitated with no independent counsel and notarized by someone who wasn't a licensed notary. It's worth less than the paper it's printed on, and we both know it." "That's your opinion?" "It's Dr. Eleanor Reeves's professional opinion. She's prepared to testify that no patient in Mrs. Chen's condition could legally consent to anything, much less sign away her marital rights. She's also prepared to testify that presenting such a document to a vulnerable patient constitutes medical abuse." Preston opened his mouth, then closed it again. Catherine continued, her voice pleasant and deadly. "Furthermore, we have evidence that Mr. Chen has been committing extensive financial fraud. He's hidden approximately $8 million in offshore accounts and shell corporations, evaded taxes on those funds, and violated his fiduciary duty to his own company's shareholders. We have bank records, emails, and testimony from a forensic accountant." She pulled out a folder and opened it, showing photographs of documents. "We also have evidence of a conspiracy between Mr. Chen and his mother, Helen Chen, to defraud Mrs. Chen through the use of a fake notary. That's forgery and fraud, both criminal offenses. The emails between them are quite explicit about their intentions." Marcus had gone pale. "You went through my emails?" "Discovery is a wonderful thing," Catherine said. "Now you have a choice. You can accept my client's demands and settle this quietly, or we can go to trial and I will make sure every piece of evidence becomes public record. Your fraud, your conspiracy, your affair, all of it. I'll send the financial records to the SEC and the IRS. I'll refer the fake notarization to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. And when it's all said and done, you won't just lose your marriage. You'll lose your company, your reputation, and quite possibly your freedom." The silence in the room was deafening. Preston leaned over and whispered something to Marcus. Marcus shook his head violently. Preston whispered again, more urgently. Marcus looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the moment he realized he'd underestimated me. That the quiet, compliant wife he'd thought he married was gone, replaced by someone who knew all his secrets and wasn't afraid to use them. "This is because of Sheila," he said suddenly. "You're doing this to punish me for Sheila." "I'm doing this because you tried to steal my rights while I was hemorrhaging in a hospital bed," I said calmly. "I'm doing this because you hid millions of dollars while telling me we couldn't afford dance lessons for our daughter. I'm doing this because you plan to leave me with nothing while you rode off into the sunset with my former best friend. Sheila is just a symptom of who you really are." "I loved you," he said, and he actually sounded like he believed it. "No, you didn't. You loved having someone to control, someone who made you feel powerful and important. But you never loved me. If you had, you wouldn't have let your mother torture me for 10 years. You wouldn't have cheated on me for 7. You wouldn't have planned to destroy me." "Rachel, we're done talking. Accept the settlement or face the consequences. Your choice." Marcus looked at his lawyer. Preston was already pulling out a pen. "My client accepts," Preston said heavily. Catherine smiled. "Excellent. We'll draw up the papers today. Mr. Chen can sign tomorrow. Marcus signed the settlement agreement the next morning in Catherine's office with an expression that suggested he was signing his own death warrant. Maybe he was. The terms were exactly what Catherine had demanded. I got the house, full custody of Emma, 65% of all marital assets, including the offshore accounts, monthly child support and alimony, legal fees paid, and a college fund for Emma. Marcus got to keep his job and 35% of the marital assets, which was still more money than most people would see in a lifetime. He also agreed to a gag order. He couldn't discuss the divorce publicly or disparage me in any way. If he violated it, the criminal evidence would be referred to prosecutors. Sign here, Catherine said, pointing to the signature line. Marcus's hand was shaking as he picked up the pen. He looked at me one last time. You'll regret this, he said. I don't think I will. He signed. Just like that, 10 years of marriage was over. Catherine walked Marcus and his lawyer out, all professional courtesy now that she'd won. I sat in her office, staring at the signed agreement, and felt nothing but relief. How do you feel? Catherine asked when she came back. Free, I said, and meant it, but I wasn't done yet. Marcus had been dealt with, but there was still Sheila. Catherine made the call to her friend at the DA's office that afternoon. By the end of the week, an investigation had been opened into Sheila's embezzlement from Community Care Alliance. I didn't know the investigation was happening. Catherine kept me insulated from it deliberately so I'd have plausible deniability. But I knew something was wrong when Sheila started calling. 53 times in 2 days. I didn't answer. I'd blocked her number after I found out about the affair, but she'd started calling from different numbers, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. Rachel, please, I know you're mad, but we need to talk. Rachel, I'm sorry about Marcus, but you have to understand, we didn't mean for it to happen. Rachel, something's wrong. There are investigators asking questions at my work. Rachel, please, I think someone's trying to hurt me. I need your help. Rachel, for the love of God, pick up the phone. Catherine advised me to keep ignoring her. Let her spiral. She earned it. The arrest happened on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks after my divorce was finalized. Sheila was taken into custody at her office in front of her colleagues and her boss, charged with embezzlement, wire fraud, and theft from a charitable organization. The bail was set at $200,000, which she couldn't make because all her assets had been frozen. She spent 3 days in jail before her parents mortgaged their house to get her out. I heard about it from Emma's ballet teacher, who heard about it from Sheila's sister, who was apparently devastated that Sheila would do something like this. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, nothing. She'd made her choices, and now she was facing consequences, just like Marcus. Marcus, to his credit, or possibly his lawyer's advice, stayed completely silent. He didn't call me, didn't text, didn't show up at the house. His visitation with Emma happened exactly as outlined in the custody agreement. Every other weekend, supervised by a professional, with Emma being dropped off and picked up at a neutral location, so I never had to see him. Emma noticed the change, of course. She was only 5, but she was smart. Why don't I live with Daddy anymore? She asked one night at bedtime. Because Daddy and I decided we'd be happier living separately, I said gently. But he still loves you very much, and you'll still see him regularly. Is it because he was mean to you? My heart clenched. Why do you think Daddy was mean to me? I heard you crying sometimes, and Grandma Helen was always saying bad things about you. And Daddy never wanted to play with me, only you wanted to play with me. I hugged her tight. Baby, the divorce isn't your fault. It's about grown-up problems that have nothing to do with you. You are loved and you are safe, and that's never going to change. Okay, she snuggled into me. I like it better here anyway. It's more fun with just us. Yeah? Yeah. You smile more now. Out of the mouths of babes. Sheila's trial was scheduled for 6 months after her arrest. Her lawyer tried to get a plea deal, but the DA wasn't interested. This was a high-profile case involving charity fraud, and they wanted to make an example. Catherine got me updates through her contacts at the DA's office. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, emails, testimony from her employer's accountant. Sheila had been skimming donations for years, small amounts at first, but increasing over time, and she'd been sloppy about covering her tracks. She's going to prison, Catherine told me. The question is for how long? What's the range? With the charges she's facing, 3 to 10 years. Her lawyer is trying to argue that she'll cooperate and make restitution, but she spent the money. There's nothing to make restitution with. 3 to 10 years. It seemed like both too much and not enough. Did Marcus know? I asked. About the embezzlement? We don't have evidence that he did, but he certainly benefited. She was using the money to look successful enough to be with him. Expensive apartment, expensive clothes, expensive lifestyle. He liked having a mistress who looked the part. Has he tried to help her? Not that we know of. In fact, he's been very publicly distant from her since the arrest. His lawyer probably advised him to cut all ties. So Marcus had abandoned Sheila the moment she became a liability. How perfectly on brand for him. I went to the sentencing hearing. I sat in the back of the courtroom wearing sunglasses and a hat and watched Sheila stand before the judge. She'd lost weight. Her hair was lank, her skin was sallow, and she looked 10 years older than she had 6 months ago. She was wearing a cheap suit her lawyer had probably chosen, and she kept twisting a tissue in her hands. The judge was a woman in her 60s, stern-faced and no nonsense. Ms. Barnett, she said, you have pleaded guilty to embezzlement, wire fraud, and theft from a charitable organization. The victims of your crimes are some of the most vulnerable members of our community. People who trusted Community Care Alliance to help them and whose donations you stole to fund your personal lifestyle. Do you have anything to say before I pass sentence? Sheila stood up, her voice shaking. Your Honor, I'm so sorry for what I did. I was in a bad place emotionally, and I made terrible decisions. I know I hurt people, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I'm asking for mercy, for a chance to make this right. The judge's expression didn't change. You had years to make this right, Ms. Barnett. Instead, you continued to steal, continued to lie, and only showed remorse when you were caught. The presentence report shows no mitigating factors. You came from a stable home, you had a good education, you had opportunities that many people don't get. You simply chose to take what wasn't yours because you wanted things you hadn't earned. She paused, looking down at her papers. This court sentences you to 5 years in state prison, to be followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You will pay restitution to Community Care Alliance in the amount of $203,000 plus court fees and penalties. You will serve at least 85% of your sentence before being eligible for parole. Sheila started crying, loud, messy sobs that echoed through the courtroom. The bailiff led her away, still crying, and I sat there feeling empty. It was over. Marcus was dealt with. Sheila was dealt with. They'd both been punished for what they did. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like closing a chapter of a book I'd never wanted to read in the first place. I left the courthouse and went home to Emma, who was waiting with my mother, playing with her dolls on the living room floor. Mama, she called when I walked in. Look, I made a castle. I knelt down next to her and admired the elaborate construction of blocks and pillows and blankets. It's beautiful, I said. It's for princesses who don't need princes, she said seriously. Because they can rescue themselves. I hugged her tight and cried into her hair, and she patted my back like I did for her when she was sad. It's okay, Mama, she said. We're safe in our castle. Yes, I whispered. We are. The first year after the divorce was strange. I kept expecting to wake up back in the hospital bed, back in my first life, for this all to have been a dream. But every morning I woke up in my house. My house now, fully paid off, with the deed in my name, with Emma sleeping safely down the hall and money in the bank and freedom stretching out ahead of me. I used some of the settlement money to start a foundation. I called it Second Chances, and its mission was to help women escape bad marriages by funding their legal fees, their housing, their fresh starts. Catherine joined the board of directors. So did Dr. Reeves and Maria Gonzalez, the PI. We helped 30 women in the first year, women who were trapped in marriages like I'd been trapped, who needed someone to believe in them and give them resources to fight back. Every woman we helped felt like redemption for the woman I'd been in my first life. Powerless, afraid, destroyed. Emma thrived. Without the constant tension of a failing marriage, without Marcus's neglect and Helen's criticism, she blossomed. She became confident, outgoing, creative. She made friends easily, she excelled in school, and she asked about Marcus less and less. His supervised visitations became sporadic. He'd cancel at the last minute with excuses about work, then he'd show up and spend the whole 2 hours on his phone, then he'd just stop scheduling them altogether. "Doesn't Daddy want to see me?" Emma asked once, and I saw the hurt in her eyes. "Daddy has a lot going on," I said carefully. "But that's his loss, baby, because you're amazing and he's missing out on knowing you." "Is it because I'm not a boy?" My heart broke. "What? No, honey, why would you think that?" "Grandma Helen always said Daddy wanted a son, that I was a disappointment. I was going to kill Helen, except she was already dead to me, so what was the point?" "Emma, listen to me. You are not a disappointment. You are perfect exactly as you are. If Daddy can't see that, that's his problem, not yours. Do you understand?" She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. It took months of therapy for both of us to undo the damage Marcus and his family had done. But slowly, Emma started to believe that she was worthy of love, that she was enough, that her father's absence wasn't her fault, and I started to believe it too. 2 years after the divorce, I met someone new. His name was David Harrison, and he was a literature professor at the university. He came to speak at a foundation event about financial salsa, literacy and domestic abuse. His mother had escaped a violent marriage when he was young, and he'd grown up watching her rebuild her life from nothing. We talked for 3 hours that first night, long after the event had ended and the venue staff was pointedly cleaning up around us. He was funny and kind and interested in my work. He didn't care about my money or my connections. He just liked talking to me. We had coffee the next week, dinner the week after that, a movie, a museum, long walks where we talked about everything and nothing. He met Emma 4 months in, and she liked him immediately because he treated her like a person instead of an accessory. "David's nice," she told me after he'd left from our first family dinner together. "He actually listens when I talk." "I'm glad you like him." "Are you going to marry him?" "Whoa, let's slow down. We're just dating." "But if you did marry him, would he be my dad?" "No, baby. Marcus is your biological father, and nothing changes that. But if David and I got serious, he could be a really important person in your life. Like a bonus parent." She thought about it. "Okay, that sounds good." David and I dated for a year before he proposed, in the same restaurant where Marcus had proposed to me a lifetime ago. But where Marcus had made it a spectacle, getting down on one knee in front of everyone, making sure all eyes were on him, David was quiet and private. "I love you," he said, holding my hand across the table. "I love Emma. I love the life we could build together. Will you marry me?" I said yes. We got married in our backyard with Emma as the flower girl and Catherine as my maid of honor. The guest list was small, 50 people we actually cared about instead of the 300 Marcus had insisted on inviting to our wedding so he could show off. Emma walked me down the aisle, 8 years old and radiant in her purple dress. "Are you happy, Mama?" she whispered. "So happy." "Me too." David cried when he said his vows. I cried too. Emma cried because we were crying, then laughed because crying was silly. It was perfect. That night, after Emma was asleep and the guests had gone home, David and I sat on our porch and looked at the stars. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" "For seeing me, the real me, not who Marcus wanted me to be or who I thought I had to be, just me." He kissed me. "That's the only you I ever wanted." 5 years after my rebirth, Emma started asking questions about Marcus. He'd faded almost entirely from her life by then. The supervised visitations had stopped years ago. He'd remarried, some young woman from his gym, barely out of college, and divorced again within a year. His business was struggling, his reputation was ruined, and he'd become irrelevant to our lives. But Emma was 10 now, old enough to understand more, and she wanted answers. "Why did Daddy stop seeing me?" she asked one night. I'd known this conversation was coming. I'd prepared for it with Emma's therapist. "Because Daddy has problems he's never dealt with," I said carefully. "He was hurt by his own parents, and he learned bad ways of handling relationships and responsibility. And instead of getting help and doing better, he chose to keep making the same mistakes." "Did he ever love me?" "I think he loved the idea of you, but he didn't know how to actually be a father to you." "Did he love you?" "I think he loved having a wife who made him look good, but he didn't know how to actually be a husband to me." Emma was quiet for a long time then. "I'm glad you left him." "Yeah?" "Yeah, because if you hadn't, we wouldn't have David. And I really love David." "I love David too." "And we wouldn't have the foundation. And all those women wouldn't have gotten help." "That's true." "So even though it was bad for a while, good things came from it, right?" "Out of the mouths of babes." "Right," I said, hugging her. "Good things came from it." 10 years after my rebirth, the foundation had helped over 2,000 women. We'd expanded to 3 cities, with plans for 5 more. We'd lobbied for changes to Postnup laws in our state, making it harder to enforce agreements signed under duress. We'd created a network of lawyers, therapists, financial advisors, and housing specialists who all worked together to help women escape and rebuild. I'd written a book about financial literacy in marriage, about protecting yourself, about recognizing the signs of coercive control. It became a bestseller, recommended by therapists and lawyers across the country. Marcus remarried for the 3rd time and divorced for the 4th. I heard about it through Emma, who heard about it from a cousin on Marcus's side who'd reached out on social media. "Daddy got divorced again," Emma told me, 15 years old now and impressively unbothered by her father's life choices. "I'm sorry to hear that." "I'm not. She seemed nice. She deserves better than him." "Very mature of you." "Well, I learned from the best." She smiled at me. "You showed me what a healthy relationship looks like. You and David are happy, you respect each other, you communicate. That's what I want someday." My heart swelled with pride. "You'll find it, baby, because you know what you deserve and you won't settle for less." Exactly. 15 years after my rebirth, Helen died. Marcus called to tell me, his voice hollow and distant. "Mom passed away," he said. "Heart attack." "I thought you should know, for Emma's sake." "I'm sorry for your loss," I said, meaning it. I wasn't sorry Helen was dead. She'd been a monster who deliberately tried to destroy me. But I was sorry Marcus had lost his mother because whatever else she'd been his parent. "There's a funeral next week. Emma should come. Mom would have wanted that." Emma, who was 17 now, overheard the conversation. She shook her head firmly. "I don't want to go," she said when I'd hung up. "Are you sure? She was your grandmother." "She was mean to you. She helped Daddy hurt you. I remember how she used to look at you when I was little like you were dirt. I don't want to go to her funeral and pretend to be sad." "It's okay to mourn who she could have been, even if you're not mourning who she was." Emma thought about it. "I'll send flowers, but I'm not going." I told Marcus. He didn't argue. I never found out if he was disappointed or relieved. 20 years after my rebirth, Emma graduated from Berkeley Law School. She decided to specialize in family law, specifically in helping women escape coercive marriages. She'd interned at Catherine's firm every summer, learning from the best, and Catherine had already offered her a full-time position after she passed the bar. "I want to do what you do," Emma told me at her graduation party. "Help people who are trapped. Give them their second chances. You're going to be amazing at it." I learned from the best. We'd had this conversation before in my first life, but in that timeline, Emma had been raised by Helen and Marcus, taught that women should be submissive and accommodating. She'd gone into business, following in her father's footsteps, and she'd been miserable. This Emma was fierce and passionate and determined to make the world better, This Emma was free. Did Daddy come? She asked, looking around the party. I invited him. He RSVP'd, yes, but he's not here. Emma nodded, unsurprised. It's okay. David's here. You're here. Everyone who matters is here. David came over then, carrying drinks for both of us, and Emma hugged him tight. Thanks for coming, Dad, she said. David had started crying immediately. Emma had been calling him Dad for years now, but it still got him every time. I wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetie. I watched them hug and felt a profound sense of peace. This was my family. This was my life. And it was beautiful. 25 years after my rebirth, I stood in front of 500 women at the Foundation's 25th anniversary gala. I was 30 years old when I discovered my husband had been lying to me for years, I began, my voice steady and clear. He'd coerced me into signing a postnuptial agreement that would have left me destitute. He was planning to leave me for my best friend. He'd hidden millions of dollars while telling me we couldn't afford basic necessities for our daughter. And I thought I had no options, no power, no future. The room was silent, 500 women hanging on every word. But I got lucky. I got a second chance. Not everyone does. I had access to resources, to an incredible lawyer, to information that helped me fight back, and I used that chance to reclaim my life, to build something better. This foundation exists because I believe everyone deserves that opportunity to start over, to be heard, to win. The applause was thunderous. Emma stood in the front row, tears streaming down her face, applauding harder than anyone. After the speech, women lined up to talk to me, to share their stories, to ask for advice, to thank me for the work we'd done. One woman, young and scared, showed me a document on her phone. My boyfriend wants me to sign this before we get married, she said. He says it's just to protect what he brought into the relationship. But something feels wrong. I looked at it, a prenup that would leave her with nothing if they divorced, even if he was at fault. Don't sign this, I said firmly, and call this number. I handed her Catherine's card. Catherine was semi-retired now, but still took consultations for the foundation. Tell her I sent you. She'll review it and tell you what your options are. But what if he gets mad? What if he calls off the wedding? Then you'll know you dodged a bullet, I said gently. A man who threatens to leave you if you don't sign away your rights is a man who is always going to hurt you. Better to know now than in 5, 10, 25 years. She nodded, clutching the card like a lifeline. Thank you. You're going to be okay. I promise. As she walked away, Catherine appeared at my elbow. She was 75 now, silver hair turned white, but still as sharp as ever. Still saving the world, one woman at a time? Someone has to. You've built something incredible here, Rachel. You should be proud. I am, but I'm more grateful. For the second chance, for the fight. For everything that came after. Any regrets? I thought about Marcus, who I'd heard was living in a small apartment downtown. His fourth marriage having ended in another expensive divorce. His relationship with Emma non-existent. I thought about Sheila, who'd served her 5 years and moved across the country, reportedly working at a car wash and living with her parents. I thought about Helen, dead and buried with only a handful of people at her funeral. And I thought about myself, standing in a room full of women I'd helped, with a daughter who was brilliant and kind, with a husband who loved me, with a life I'd built from the ashes of the one that had tried to destroy me. Only that I didn't do it sooner, I said. But then again, maybe I needed to fall completely to learn how to fly. Catherine smiled. That's poetic. That's the truth. 30 years after my rebirth, I was 60 years old. Emma had been a partner at Catherine's firm for 5 years. She'd argued 3 cases before the state Supreme Court, winning precedents that made it harder to enforce prenups and postnups signed under duress. She'd written a book about coercive control in marriage that had become required reading in law schools. She had twin daughters of her own now, bright-eyed girls who loved books and justice and their grandmother's stories about fighting back. David and I had retired to a house by the ocean. We spent our days reading, walking on the beach, hosting family dinners where Emma and her family came over and the twins ran around shrieking with joy. I thought about my first life sometimes, but less and less as the years went on, that life, that death, that desperate woman. She was someone I'd been, but not someone I was anymore. One morning, walking on the beach with David, he asked me, "Do you ever wish you could tell your younger self something? Some wisdom from all of this?" I thought about it, watching the waves crash against the shore. "I'd tell her that she's stronger than she knows," I said finally. "That the pain she's going through isn't permanent, but the lessons she learns will be. That the people who hurt her will get exactly what they deserve, and she'll get so much more than she can imagine." What else? That signing that Postnup was the best thing she ever did. He looked surprised. Really? Really? Because if it had been valid, if it had been done correctly, I might have accepted it. Might have stayed trapped in the idea that I deserved nothing, that I was lucky to be married to Marcus. But because it was fraudulent, because it was done with such arrogance and cruelty, that gave me my opening. That gave me my freedom. I smiled, looking out at the ocean, feeling the sun on my face. Marcus thought he was protecting himself. He thought he was so smart, getting his mother to coerce me into signing away my rights while I was at my weakest. But that moment of cruelty was his downfall, because it was so egregious, so obviously wrong, that even the law couldn't ignore it. "Karma," David said. "Why, justice," I corrected. "Karma is passive, something that happens to you. Justice is something you fight for, something you demand, something you take. And I fought for mine. And you won." I did. I took his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin, the strength of his grip. I won everything that mattered. I died at 85, peacefully in my sleep, with David beside me and Emma's family in the house. My last thought wasn't of Marcus or Sheila or Helen or the life I'd lost in my first timeline. It was of the Postnup, that illegitimate, fraudulent, coercive document that had tried to steal my future. And I smiled. Because in the end, it had given me everything. My husband had made me sign it, thinking he was protecting himself from me, thinking he was securing his assets, thinking he was winning. But after my rebirth, I'd had it reviewed, and it was completely invalid. That invalidity had been my weapon, my shield, my key to freedom. The Postnup that was supposed to destroy me had instead destroyed my enemies. The signature I'd made with shaking hands while bleeding and afraid had become my declaration of war, and I'd won that war completely. Marcus had lost everything that mattered, his reputation, his family, his daughter's love. He'd spent 30 years alone and bitter, his life a cautionary tale about hubris and cruelty. Sheila had lost her freedom, her career, her future. She'd spent years in prison and more years trying to rebuild from nothing. Helen had died knowing her son was a failure, and her granddaughter wanted nothing to do with the Chen family legacy. And I'd built an empire on their ashes, a foundation that had helped thousands of women, a daughter who was brilliant and fierce and free, a marriage built on love and respect and actual partnership, a life that mattered. The best revenge, I'd learned, was never vengeance. It was freedom. It was success. It was living well while your enemies destroyed themselves. And I'd lived spectacularly well for 55 beautiful years. As I drifted off into that final sleep, my last conscious thought was of 30-year-old Rachel, bleeding in a hospital bed, signing away her rights because she was too afraid not to. And I whispered, across the decades, across the impossible gulf of my second chance, "It's okay. It's going to be okay. That signature you're making right now, it's going to save you. You just don't know it yet." Then I let go, smiling, knowing I'd won, completely, utterly, forever.